Okay, so now we're going to jump into chapter 1, which is psychology as a way of thinking. All right, so the two main points we're going to hit today is investigating who research producers are, who research consumers are, and how scientists approach their work. So we're going to talk about research producers and research consumers first. So we'll discuss why the producer role is important, why the consumer role is important, and the benefits of being a good consumer. So why is the producer role important? So producers of research tend to be professors, academic researchers, researchers at think tanks. So these are people that actually conduct the research. These are also authors of psychology textbooks, for example. And I'm a producer too because I am teaching you all. So I'm producing a new generation of researchers. So the producer role is important because we help you learn in different courses in psychology. It's important in graduate school. So if you want to go to graduate school or when you go to graduate school, you are learning to become a quality producer of research. And if you work in a lab or plan to work in a lab, the producer role is very important because you get to have a hand in recruiting participants, analyzing data, creating surveys, etc. So being a producer is very important because we advance the state of psychology, we advance the state of science, we ask innovative questions, and we try to advance the truth that we know about psychology. But the consumer role is also important, right? So the producer role doesn't really mean much if we don't have consumers. So think about when you have been a consumer of science, not just necessarily psychology. So you've probably been a consumer of science since the moment you were born, or even before you were born, right? So your mom getting an epidural, you getting your heart rate checked, getting blood drawn from you as you were an infant, things like that. You are a consumer of science. But more specifically in our psychology courses, when you read research, when you understand and interpret research, and when you know what questions to ask, that's when your consumer role is important. So when you read the psychological research studies published in scholarly journals, you need to be able to understand them, right? So that's why in your intro classes and in this class, you will learn how to read and understand a research study. So you also need to understand and interpret the research. So are the claims that the scientists making valid? Are there any weaknesses in the study? Is the strength of a study good? So you also need to be able to read news stories based on research. So you can ask what sort of newspapers, magazines, websites, and other media that you've consumed that contain articles on research. What sort of topics do you like to research in the popular media? So being a savvy consumer of research will help you distinguish good research from bad research. And knowing the difference between good and bad research will allow you to know what questions to ask and to have a good grasp on what kind and how to evaluate this kind of research. So when reading printed or online news stories based on research, and the consumer role is also important for your future career. So no matter if you plan to be a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, a social psychologist, or any other career you might choose, being a critical consumer of research is going to be helpful in your careers. An example of this would be evidence-based treatments. So evidence-based treatment is a therapy that is supported by research. So for example, there's evidence based on scientific research that aerobic exercise can be an effective treatment for mild to moderate depression. So knowing which treatments are supported by research can help you in your career, even in your personal life. So what are the benefits of being a good consumer? So what do you gain by being a critical consumer of information, right? So let's say that you didn't you didn't have a critical eye towards research, then you might believe any article that comes up. You might fall for different ads that are trying to convince you to buy certain products. So one example of this is Scared Straight, right? So hopefully you've all heard of this program. So essentially what this program is that they take at-risk juvenile or youths who have committed petty crimes and take them into prison and expose them to what prison life is like. They get to meet prisoners. They're basically verbally abused, and this is supposed to scare them straight, right? So if you see what your future holds, if you continue committing crimes as an adolescent, burglar or vandalizer, etc., that's supposed to stop you from going to prison. So that's the hypothesis, right? So this is why they recorded this show. I think it was on A&E. So intuitively, the program makes sense, right? So no one wants to go to prison. That's not anyone's life goal. So let's say you're interested in also implementing this because you've been watching a lot of Netflix while you've been at home, and you're like, well, this sounds like a great idea. Maybe I should do this with neighborhood kids who might be following a path of violence. So if you're a critical consumer of information, you might not just take the people's accounts on Scared Straight at face value. Those are anecdotes, right? So you conduct a literature review and find that programs like Scared Straight might actually increase propensity for crime by as much as 20%. So even though Scared Straight as a program, as a show, makes intuitive sense, what the research shows us is that those kind of programs actually increase the propensity for crime by as much as 20%. And this is the same for prisons or going to jail. So most of the time, prisons or going to jail are talked about as a way to reform criminals. But after people have been to prison or to jail, people are more likely to commit crimes because their stay goes on their record. They are allowed to associate with other people that have committed these crimes and maybe have committed these crimes successfully. So jail and prison does not work as intended. All right, so how do scientists approach their work? So we approach our work in very different ways. So first, scientists are empiricists. So we're going to go through this in the next few slides. Scientists test theories. So we have a theory data cycle. We tackle applied and basic problems. We dig deeper. We make it public. So we have a publication process. And we talk to the world. From journal to journalism. So as empiricists, we use evidence from the senses or from instruments that assist the senses as a basis for conclusions. So, for example, as a social psychologist, some of the things that we measure are behaviors. So we use our visual sense to assess behaviors, or we try to examine how often people go and work out, for example. Or we use instruments that assist the senses as a basis for conclusions. So we might instead use a survey. So a survey is a kind of instrument. We also use systematic and rigorous methods and make sure that our work is independently verifiable by other observers and scientists. So, for example, we will talk a lot more about this when we talk about the scientific method, but we make sure that we provide all participants with the same surveys. We make sure that participants are randomly assigned to condition. We also make sure to write and publicize and publish our articles so that other people, if they're interested in our findings, they can, just by reading our articles, our journal articles, be able to independently reproduce our work. So scientists also test theories. So this is known as the theory data cycle. So we might have a theory. So I will talk about that in the next few slides. So there was a theory about animal behavior and about why animals have positive feelings towards their mothers. This could even expand to humans, right? So there was the cupboard theory. Cupboard, like go in the cupboard and get some jam, or the comfort theory. So those are two different kinds of theories. And the cupboard theory argued that the only reason why animals have favorable attitudes towards their mothers is because their mothers are like a cupboard. Their mothers provide nourishment, and the nourishment gives them a positive feeling. Thus, they attribute the positive feeling that they get from their nourishment to their parent or their mother. So that's the cupboard theory. The comfort theory argued that it isn't only the nourishment that leads to positive feelings for offspring towards their mothers, but it is the comfort that mothers provide that leads to the positive feeling. So even in the absence of food, offspring will like or have positive feelings towards their mothers because of the comfort that they provide. So keep that in mind while I go through this. So we collect data to test, change, or update our theories. So in that example, I gave you two competing theories, right? So we have the cupboard theory and we have the comfort theory. Another example is you try to use an app for your tablet. You try to use the weather app, but it doesn't work. You try other apps and find that the calculator works, but other apps that use Wi-Fi don't work. So then you ask your roommate if they're having Wi-Fi problems, right? So your original theory is, well, maybe none of my apps are working. And then you find that your calculator works, so it's not necessarily anything that's Wi-Fi independent, but it's Wi-Fi dependent. So then you figure out, as you collect more data, you update your theory, you say, okay, well, it's because my tablet doesn't have a connection to Wi-Fi. All right, so let's come back to the cupboard and comfort theory. So this is really cute. So this is the study that I was just talking about. So the cupboard theory again argues that a baby animal gets hungry and gets food from its mother. The food it receives causes the animal to derive pleasure, and that they soon begin to associate pleasure with their mother. Comfort theory, on the other hand, argues that animals are attached to their caregivers because of the comfort of cozy touch that they provide. So Harlow designed an experiment to test whether animals spend time with their mothers because of the food or the comfort that they provide. So in this study, Harlow had little baby monkeys, and the baby monkeys were able to choose between a wire mother that provided them food. So right here is where the baby bottle would go, and they were able to suckle at the baby mother and get food. And then they had a cloth mother. So the cloth mother was just a wire mother covered in comfortable cloth and had a terrifying but apparently mom-looking face for the little baby monkeys. And Harlow provided the monkeys with access to both, right? So they could freely move from one to the other. They could freely get food. They were free to spend as much time as they wanted to with either the cloth mother or the food providing mother, the wire mother. So what did Harlow find? Harlow found that the cupboard theory was not supported. The baby monkeys preferred to spend up to 18 hours a day with the cloth mother and only ran over to the wire mother to get nourishment to keep them alive, but they often ran back to the cloth mother. So this is an example of the theory data cycle. So you have two competing theories, you collect data, and then you revise your theory. So we found more support for the comfort theory relative to the cupboard theory. So we start here. So we have a theory, and this leads researchers to pose a particular research question, which leads us to have a research design. So in the context of the design, researchers formulate hypotheses. So researchers then collect and analyze data, which feed back into the cycle. If you have non-supporting data, this leads you to revise your theory, so leads you back here. If you find data to support your theory, then you go back and refine your theory and test a more refined version of your theory. So this is what you will be doing in this class. You're going to have a theory, you're going to build a research question, you're going to implement a research design, write down some hypotheses, you will not collect data. So data will be collected in 467, 468. Okay. So good scientific theories are supported by data. So like we found with cupboard versus comfort theory, we have data. Good scientific theories are also falsifiable. A theory must lead to hypotheses that, when tested, could actually fail to support the theory. So we have to be able to be falsifiable. We also have to have parsimony. So what parsimony means is that when all other things are equal, the simplest solution is the best. If a simple theory predicts the data as well as a more complicated theory, then you go with a more parsimonious theory. And importantly, we will not ever say this in this class or any other science class that we take. When we find data to support our theory, we don't prove anything, right? We find data to support our theory. We never use the word prove when referring to theories. Instead, psychological scientists opt to use phrases such as the data support or are consistent with the theory, or the data do not support or are inconsistent with the theory. So scientists evaluate theories based on the weight of the evidence for and against the theory. So I'm sure that another researcher could conduct and design a study that might find evidence in support of the cupboard theory relative to the comfort theory. So maybe the cupboard theory and the comfort theory only works for baby monkeys and any other animals descended from primates, such as humans, but it might not work for other animals like sharks, and that would be hard to test. All right, what else do we do as scientists? We tackle applied and basic problems. So this is sort of the spectrum under which our research lies. So for basic research, we might ask questions such as, what parts of the brain are active when experienced meditators are meditating? So for basic research, the goal really is to enhance the general body of knowledge about a particular topic. So an example is conducting a study to investigate what 9-month-old infants can remember about hidden objects. So this can often be a foundation for later applied research. We also have translational research. So this is a bridge from basic to applied research, in which findings from basic research are then used to develop applications. So for example, in a laboratory study, can meditation lessons improve college students' GRE scores? Then we have applied research. So this research is conducted in order to solve practical problems. So the word applied means that the findings will be directly applied to finding a solution to a real-world problem. So for example, has our school's new meditation program helped students focus longer on their math lessons? Great. Another aspect of being a scientist is that we dig deeper, right? So in this study, if we conducted a study looking at whether meditation improves math scores, you might not only stop at GRE scores, you might also ask whether mindfulness training is particularly helpful for people whose minds wander the most. And what's interesting about being a good consumer of research is that often the way that research is portrayed in the media, in popular media, is not exactly quite what the research tells us, right? So this is a science news cycle. So your research might say A is correlated with B, given C, under E and D conditions. But your PR office, most schools have one, say, for immediate release, scientists find potential link between A and B under certain conditions. And then a news organization picks it up. We originally started with A is correlated with B, and now they say A causes B. So now this gets picked up by the internet, people on Reddit, scientists out to kill us again. Oh my God, I knew it. Why? And then this is noticed by cable news. So A causes B all the time. What will this mean for Obama? And then this might be picked up by local news. What you don't know about A can kill you. And then your grandma might say, I'm wearing this hat to ward off A, which is so diluted from what the original message was. So this is why it's important for you to be a good consumer of research. We also are interested as consumers of research to see whether the story is accurate. So, have you ever played a game of telephone? You probably have. So someone whispers the message in the ear of the person next to him or her, and then the message gets passed from person to person until the last person shares the message out loud with a group. Often the message gets distorted and doesn't resemble what the message that the first person shared. The same thing can happen when journalists report on scientific research. Sometimes the accuracy can be lost when going from journal to journalism, and this is exactly what happened from the Mozart effect, right? So in one study, they found that listening to classical music can lead to slight improvements in GPA, and how that got interpreted is that playing classical music to your baby, even in utero, can lead to higher intelligence or IQ scores for your baby, which led to the development of all of these baby Einstein products, right? So whoever came up with this is now a millionaire, even though it's not empirically based. So everyone wants to give their kid the best chances at being successful, right? So people are playing classical music out loud while they were pregnant, while their baby was in utero. They were playing classical music when their baby cried. They had all these baby Einstein videos that they would play for their children because these videos were purported to increase children's IQ. But that wasn't empirically tested. It wasn't empirically validated, but people were so anxious to give their kids the best shot that they could at a good life, so they purchased these videos. I personally do not like classical music, and that's okay. All right, so scientists also make our research public. We do that through the publication process. So how do we share the results of our research with the scientific community? We submit it to a scientific journal. So what are journals? They are periodicals that typically are published every month. The articles in journals are peer-reviewed and written by qualified contributors. So if I submit a journal article on the efficacy of baby Einstein videos, for example, I send it to a journal. The journal sends it to reviewers, so people who do research on classical music, people who do research on child development, people who do research on intelligence, and they ask them to review these papers. Then all of the three people independently come to a decision whether they think my contribution is worthy of being in this journal, whether the design of my study is sound, whether the statistical analyses I conducted were appropriate. And this is where science gets its rigor, right? Because we have experts in different fields evaluating this paper, they can accurately assess whether the paper I wrote is enough of a contribution to the existing literature, whether it is a strong study, whether my hypotheses are supported, and whether my claims are based in well-collected data. So the audience for journals tends to be scientists and psychology students. And scientists talk to the world from journal to journalism. So there are benefits and risks of journalism coverage. So journalism is a popular media or popular press. It's what most of us read in magazines, newspapers, or online, what we hear on the radio or see on TV. These articles are easy to understand and don't usually require specialized knowledge in the field. Journalists usually find out about a research finding by reading about it in a journal or attending a professional conference, and then they turn the scholarly information into a more accessible news story to reach a wider audience. So, what they focus on more than anything is whether the story is purported to be important, whether people want to read about it. But you need to decide for yourself when you read an article in a popular news press, whether the story is important and whether the story is accurate. Like I showed you in here, the story might not always be accurate, right? So you always want to go back to the original research.